Well, sadly, the world of finance is more constrained than the world of volunteers. We started this session off by revisiting the attractive funding schemes map. And we asked our audience, all 50 of you, because you were quite a big group, where do you sit in this scheme right now? And I'm guessing there were about 50 people in the room, so let's call it 50. And 49 of them are in the public financing side of our graph, and only one was in the blended finance, in the carbon credit box, and everybody else might tap in a little bit to the greeny blue area on the right-hand side of the map. But it showed a big picture. That's where they are right now. And when we ask the question, and I think this is the telling thing, where do you see yourselves in 5 years' time? Nobody put their hand up for the public box. And I think that is really telling. It absolutely shows that people need, want, and desire a different way of doing things. So, who did we hear from? We heard from Miguel from Spain, who told us about his evolving scheme for carbon credits. It is a new scheme that he's developing for the cork oak woodlands in southern Spain. It's an evolving market, still has work to do, still with practical difficulties. And he emphasised the need for a creditable regulatory system and support from the authorities in order to be able to establish a creditable scheme that is attractive to investors. He has already got investors, but they are not yet signed up, so that mechanism between the scheme and the money isn't yet connected. We talked about additionality. In the carbon credit market, it is paid on additionality. That is, the baseline is what it is when you start, and that has to be assessed very carefully. And the additionality is the bit you get paid for in a carbon credit market. And that is part of the problem, because if you already have an excellent scheme, the landowners will not receive additional support from a carbon credit scheme. And that's baked in. So with nature credits that are not yet there, maybe this is something that could be addressed. But the additionality space is a space where investors want to be. And in Miguel's case, they are looking for compensatory schemes for maintenance that could include the nature credit space, which may be a way to top up between additionality and compensation. So then we heard from Inga. So Inga told us that Latvian habitats and species are not in good condition, and that there is a significant funding gap that's been identified. And where are nature credits right now? Because the Latvian government are looking towards nature credit as a tool to finance the gap. So there are currently, and this astonished everybody in the room, about 80 plus global schemes up and running. But when you examine how many schemes have actually paid out on nature credits, it is literally a handful. So again, the connection between the accredited scheme and the payment system is not yet developed. And the metrics for developing a creditable nature credit scheme is still probably some way off for most countries. These schemes are information heavy. The point was really well made that it's not really possible to use existing data to provide the required information for these schemes that these schemes want. Maybe apart, I think we heard maybe 30% of existing information. So because the schemes demand a lot of information, especially to establish the baseline, who is going to collect and pay for the costs of collection, which are potentially higher than the benefits that might accrue from those schemes. So that's something that really needs to be looked at. If a scheme is more expensive than the benefits you're getting from it, that is not a scheme. Scale is also a problem with some of these schemes. We heard that the peatland code, for example, the peatland standard, requires a minimum of 50 hectares. So if you have a fragmented landscape, you need many players to come together to benefit. And that's an issue. Investors aren't really attracted by schemes that have bad practice baked into them. It's counterintuitive. In Ireland, we heard that the cap used to pay per head of livestock in a location. And of course, that led to overgrazing. So then the cap was on the numbers, and it was a prescribed number of heads of livestock per hectare. And that led to undergrazing. So then there was a prescribed number, and that is not suitable either. So none of these schemes benefited the habitat that they were supposed to be benefiting. So we have to be careful of these schemes that sit side by side with schemes that we want to attract financing for restoration and renovation, and schemes that are doing exactly the opposite. We heard a warning about being careful with investors from large organisations with big pockets, deep pockets of money, that can come into a situation, drive up prices per unit, and then any other scheme that's evolved around it are not going to be part of that market. There is an important point around, if we practitioners are not part of that market will still evolve. It will happen. It will be driven by the finance and the speculation and the economics and the investors, and they will take over the system, and we will not be part of that conversation. Then is it fit for purpose? That is the question. We talked then, and we heard from our third presenter, Ika, about payment for use of resources as another potential mechanism. So we moved away from the credit market. And we heard that that is a possibility, but we need to be very careful to avoid double funding. We had a good example from Belgium, from the Netherlands, where we heard about an N2K site, Natura 2000 site, which is completely privately owned, and you have to pay to go in. So there's a payment for the resource for the service. There were some issues around charging for an area which has traditionally been opened, and we heard that from Latvia, where you've for years been able to access nature, and if you suddenly start charging for it, well, that's not going to go down terribly well with the user community. In Bulgaria, we heard that there may require a change in legislation if that is going to happen. And in Sweden, we heard that they may charge, but if there's no payment, they have no authority to act. So, people could break the rules effectively. And we also heard from the Belgian colleagues that we should also be able to take into account the secondary revenues that come, for example, from tourism and from people using areas. They are equally important as direct payments. So, finally, we went on to talk about other potential tools on our map. We talked about, do all investments need to come with a return on that investment? And the answer to that is no. There are philanthropic funds, quite sizable ones in some cases, that can be large enough to give that investment potential that's needed without a requirement for return. But, there's always a but, we need to be careful of greenwashing. But if we make sure that due diligence is in place, and that's the role of government, then those safeguards are put in place. And if it requires a third party to act as a kind of a locator, or as a broker, then that is potentially a way forward. We learnt that there are untapped potential for companies to invest without the credits or returns on investment, and that is maybe a really good space that we need to be investigating. We also talked about payment for ecosystem services, which is right at the far end of the graph there. And our Bulgarian colleague again asked if there was any examples of where that had been used successfully. And sadly, the only examples that were given were from the United Kingdom, but certainly there are some very good examples of where, for example, insurance companies have invested in flood protection schemes to finance nature-based solutions to prevent flooding further downstream, to improve water quality, and to investigate nutrient runoff. So the main conclusion is there's no silver bullet, but there is hope. And credit schemes, whilst they may look attractive, they could be years in the making. They are difficult to operate, and there may be other easier routes to move away from public financing towards the private financing end of the scale. But it is absolutely crucial that we are part of the conversation that develops the appropriate scheme. Okay, thank you. And for those of you that were listening and in my session, have I missed anything out or misrepresented anybody? No? Okay, good. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.